Susan Miller sat on the edge of her bed, staring at the photo of her son Eric that rested on her bedside table. The morning light poured through the thin curtains of her modest two-bedroom home, illuminating the dust particles that floated lazily in the air. She ran her finger over the glass frame, wiping away a small smudge. The picture showed Eric in his high school graduation gown, his smile wide and his eyes full of hope. That day had been one of the proudest moments of her life. Now, 4 years later, she would soon watch him graduate from college. Susan checked her watch, a habit formed from years of working as a nurse where timing was often the difference between life and death. It was 6:30 a.m. She had the day off, a rare luxury she had arranged months in advance. The university graduation ceremony was 3 days away, and she wanted everything to be perfect. The coffee maker in the kitchen gurgled and hissed as Susan walked into the small, tidy space. The refrigerator was covered with magnets from various places, holding up notes, reminders, and at the center, Eric's graduation invitation. The embossed letters caught the light. State University Commencement. Ceremony 3:00 p.m. Saturday, June 7th. Susan poured herself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table. She opened a small notebook where she had written her to-do list for the next few days. She needed to pick up her dress from the dry cleaners, get a haircut, buy some new shoes, and wrap Eric's graduation gift, a watch that had belonged to his grandfather, restored and polished to a new shine. The sound of her phone ringing broke the morning quiet. Susan smiled when she saw Eric's name on the screen. "Good morning, sweetheart," she answered, her voice warm with affection. "Hey, Mom," Eric replied. "Just checking that you're still coming on Saturday. I got you a seat in the front section." "Wild. Horses couldn't keep me away," Susan assured him. "I've been planning for this day since you were in diapers." Eric laughed. "I know, Mom. You never let me forget it." His voice softened. "I just wanted to say thanks. For everything. For working. All those double shifts so I could go to college. For never missing a parent-teacher conference even when you were exhausted. For believing in me." Susan felt tears welling in her eyes. As a single mother, she had sacrificed so much to give Eric opportunities she never had. Working as a trauma nurse at Memorial Hospital wasn't easy. The hours were long, the work was physically and emotionally draining, and the pay wasn't great. But it had been enough to put Eric through school with the help of some scholarships. "You did all the hard work," Susan said. "I just cheered from the sidelines." "We both know that's not true," Eric replied. "Anyway, I have to run to my final meeting with my advisor. See you Saturday." After hanging up, Susan sipped her coffee and looked around the kitchen. Memories flooded her mind. Eric doing homework at this table while she cooked dinner, their late-night talks when she got home from night shifts, the many times they'd celebrated small victories together in this room. The doorbell rang, pulling Susan from her thoughts. She opened the door to find her neighbor, Linda Brown, holding a plate of muffins. "Thought you might like these," Linda said, handing over the plate. "Blueberry, your favorite." "You're too kind," Susan replied, inviting her friend inside. "Coffee?" Linda nodded and followed Susan to the kitchen. The two women had been neighbors for 15 years, ever since Susan had moved into the neighborhood, when Eric was just starting elementary school. Linda, a retired schoolteacher, had often watched Eric when Susan had to work unexpected shifts. "So, the big day is almost here," Linda said, sitting at the table. "You must be so proud." "I can hardly believe it," Susan admitted. "It feels like just yesterday he was losing his baby teeth and asking for help with his math homework. And now he's graduating with honors in engineering," Linda smiled. "That boy is going places. He's already got a job lined up with that big firm in the city," Susan said, pride evident in her voice. "Starting salary is more than I make after 20 years of nursing." Linda reached across the table and squeezed Susan's hand. "Because you gave him wings, Susan. Not every child gets that chance." The conversation was interrupted by the shrill ring of Susan's work phone, the special ringtone she used for hospital emergencies. Her heart sank as she answered. "Susan, it's Frank," said the voice of her supervisor. "I know you're off today, but we have a situation brewing. Weather Service is predicting severe storms this afternoon with potential for flooding. The hospital is going on alert status. Can you come in for a few hours to help with preparations? Susan glanced at her to-do list. She had planned to go to the dry cleaners and hair salon today. I'll be there in 30 minutes, she replied without hesitation. Linda gave her a knowing look as Susan hung up. Duty calls? Just for a few hours, Susan explained. They're preparing for possible storm casualties. I should be home by early afternoon. Want me to pick up your dress from the cleaners? Linda offered. I'm heading that way anyway. Would you? That would be such a help, Susan said gratefully. The ticket is on the fridge. As Susan changed into her scrubs, she thought about all the times her work had interrupted family plans over the years. The Christmas morning when a bus crash had kept her at the hospital for 24 hours straight. The parent-teacher conferences she'd attended in scrubs, sometimes with dried blood still under her fingernails despite her best efforts to clean up. The school plays where she'd slipped in at the last minute, missing Eric's opening lines but grateful to see anything at all. She had always promised herself that some moments would be sacred. Eric's graduations, his big achievements, the milestones that marked his journey to adulthood. No matter what happened, she would be there, fully present for those special days. The drive to Memorial Hospital was a familiar one. Susan had made this journey thousands of times over the past 20 years. In sunshine and snow, day and night, the hospital building came into view, a sprawling complex of windows and brick that had been her second home for most of her adult life. In the staff parking lot, Susan spotted Frank waiting for her near the entrance. His concerned expression immediately told her that something more was happening than routine storm preparations. What's wrong? She asked as she approached. Just got word of a multi-car pileup on the interstate, Frank explained. Early reports suggest at least 15 vehicles involved. Life Flight is already en route with the first critical patients. Susan's nursing instincts kicked in immediately. How many incoming? At least 7 critical, dozens of walking wounded, Frank replied. I'm sorry to pull you in on your day off, but with Judy out on maternity leave, you're our best trauma nurse. Together, they walked quickly through the hospital corridors toward the emergency department. Staff members were already preparing trauma rooms, setting up additional IV stations and readying blood supplies. Susan, called Dr. Alan Peters, the chief of emergency medicine. Glad you're here. First helicopter lands in 5 minutes. We have a male, mid-30s, crush injuries to the chest and abdomen, possible internal bleeding. Susan tied her hair back and washed her hands thoroughly at the sink. As she slipped on gloves and a protective gown, she felt the familiar focus settling over her. In these moments, nothing existed except the patients who needed her skills. Trauma bay doors burst open as the first patient arrived, surrounded by paramedics rattling off vital signs and injury details. Susan moved efficiently, helping to transfer the man from the stretcher to the hospital bed, connecting monitoring equipment, and assessing his wounds with practiced hands. Hours passed in a blur of activity. One critical patient after another arrived, each requiring Susan's expertise and calm decision-making. By late afternoon, the storm had indeed hit, complicating rescue efforts at the accident scene and bringing in additional patients injured in weather-related incidents. At 7:30 p.m., Susan finally took her first break, stepping into the staff lounge to gulp down a cup of lukewarm coffee and a protein bar from the vending machine. She checked her phone and saw 3 missed calls from Linda. Susan, it's me, Linda's voicemail said. I got your dress, but the salon called to say they can't hold your appointment. I told them it was an emergency at the hospital. Call me when you can. Susan sighed and rubbed her tired eyes. The salon could wait. She still had 2 days before. The graduation. She just needed to be done with this emergency by then. Nothing would keep her from Eric's big day. Nothing. Susan did not go home that night. The storm had worsened, bringing wind damage and flooding to parts of the city. The victims from the highway pileup kept arriving, along with people injured by falling trees and debris. By midnight, every bed in the emergency room was filled and patients lined the hallways on gurneys. Frank found Susan checking the vitals of an elderly woman who had been rescued from her flooded home. Susan, you've been here for 16 hours straight. You need to rest. Susan shook her head. I'm fine. We're still short-staffed, and Dr. Peters said more patients are on the way. At least take a 30-minute break in the on-call room, Frank C. insisted. I'll wake you if we need you. Too tired to argue, Susan made her way to the small room where hospital staff could nap during long shifts. She set her phone alarm for 30 minutes and collapsed onto the narrow cot. She was asleep, almost instantly. The shrill ring of her alarm seemed to come just seconds later. Susan opened her eyes, disoriented for a moment before remembering where she was. Her body ached with fatigue, but she forced herself to sit up. A quick check of her phone showed a text from Linda. Called hair salon again. They can fit you in, tomorrow at 10 a.m. Hope things calm down at the hospital soon. Tomorrow was Friday, the day before the graduation. Susan typed a quick thank you to Linda and headed back to the emergency room. The scene that greeted her was even more chaotic than before. Ambulance sirens wailed outside, and medical staff rushed between patients. Dr. Peters spotted Susan and waved her over. Bridge collapse on County Road 8, he explained grimly. At least 5 vehicles were on it when it went down. First victims are arriving now. Susan's heart sank. A bridge collapse meant complex crush injuries, possible drownings, and hypothermia from the cold water. These cases would take all their skill and resources. What do you need me to do? She asked. Take trauma room 3. We have a 17-year-old male coming in with multiple fractures and a possible spinal injury. For the next several hours, Susan worked without stopping. She assisted in emergency surgeries, comforted terrified patients, and performed countless life-saving procedures. The teenager in trauma room 3 had been on his way home from a friend's house when the bridge gave way. His parents arrived at the hospital wide-eyed with fear, clinging to each other as Susan explained their son's injuries. Will he walk again? The boy's father asked, his voice breaking. The neurosurgeon is cautiously optimistic, Susan told them honestly. The next 24 hours will tell us more. The mother grabbed Susan's hand. Thank you for taking care of our Joey. He's our only child. Susan squeezed the woman's hand in return, thinking of Eric. We're doing everything we can. By Thursday afternoon, Susan had been working for nearly 30 hours with only short breaks. The hospital hallways had finally begun to clear as patients were either discharged or moved to regular rooms. The emergency phase of the disaster was winding down. Frank approached Susan as she finished charting a patient's vital signs. You look dead on your feet, he said. Go home. You've done more than your share. Susan glanced at the clock. 4:30 p.m. She had been at the hospital for over 30 hours. Are you sure you can manage? The night shift is coming in at full strength, and we've called in extra staff from other hospitals, Frank assured her. The worst is over. Go home and sleep. 2. Exhausted to drive safely, Susan called a ride service. As she waited outside the hospital entrance, she checked her phone. There were 5 missed calls from Eric and several text messages asking if she was okay. She had been so focused on her patients that she hadn't thought to update him. She called him immediately. Eric, I'm so sorry I didn't call sooner. It's been crazy at the hospital with the storm and accidents. Mom, I've been worried sick, Eric exclaimed. It's all over the news about the bridge collapse and the pileup. Have you been working this whole time? Yes, but I'm heading home now to get some sleep, she assured him. Everything is still on track for Saturday, I just need to rest. Are you sure? You sound exhausted. I'll be fine, Susan promised. Wild horses, remember? When Susan finally reached her house, she barely had the energy to shower before falling into bed. She set her alarm for 9 a.m., giving herself time to make the hair appointment Linda had rescheduled. The next thing Susan knew, her phone was ringing. She fumbled for it in the darkness, her mind foggy with sleep. Hello? Susan, it's Frank. His voice was tense. I hate to do this to you, but we have a situation. Susan squinted at her bedside clock. 7:15 a.m. on Friday morning. She had slept for nearly 14 hours. What's happening? Joey Mitchell, the teenager from the bridge collapse, has taken a turn for the worse. Increased pressure on his spinal cord. The neurosurgeon wants to operate immediately, and he's asking for you, specifically to assist. Says you're the only nurse who knows the case well enough. Susan closed her eyes, thinking of Joey's frightened parents and their desperate faces. Then she thought of Eric's graduation, now just over 30 hours away. Can't Amy help? She asked, naming another experienced trauma nurse. Amy tried, but Joey had a panic attack when she started prepping him. He's asking for you. His parents are too. Susan sighed. Tell them I'll be there in 30 minutes. After a quick shower and a piece of toast, Susan called Linda. I have to go back in, she explained. Can you cancel my hair appointment? One of my patients needs emergency surgery. Oh, Susan, Linda said sympathetically. What about the graduation? Tomorrow? I'll be there, Susan insisted. The surgery shouldn't take more than a few hours. I'll still have time to get ready. Back at Memorial Hospital, Susan found Joey's parents pacing outside the surgical suite. When they saw her, relief washed over their faces. He keeps asking if you're here, Joey's mother said tearfully. He says you promised to take care of him. Susan didn't remember making such a promise, but it didn't matter. She changed into surgical scrubs and went to see Joey in the pre-op area. The teenager's face was pale with pain and fear. You came, he said when he saw her. Of course I did, Susan replied, checking his IV and monitors. We're going to take good care of you. The surgery lasted much longer than expected. What should have been a 3-hour procedure stretched to 5, then 7 hours as the doctors encountered complications. Susan stood by the operating table the entire time, handing instruments, monitoring vital signs, and providing critical support. By the time they wheeled Joey to the recovery room, it was nearly 5 p.m. on Friday evening. Susan's legs ached from standing so long and her back throbbed with pain, but Joey was stable, his spinal cord decompressed, his prognosis improved. His parents hugged Susan outside the recovery room. The doctor said if the surgery had been delayed even a few more hours, he might have been permanently paralyzed, Joey's father said, his voice choked with emotion. We can never thank you enough. Susan smiled tiredly. Just doing my job. Joey's going to need months of therapy, but he has a good chance for a full recovery. As she left the surgical floor, Susan ran into Frank. You look terrible, he said, bluntly. When was the last time you slept properly? Last night, Susan replied, for about 14 hours. And before that? Susan shrugged. I don't remember. Frank shook his head. Go home, and don't come back until Monday at the earliest. Don't worry, Susan said. Tomorrow is Eric's graduation. Nothing will keep me from being there. By the time Susan arrived home, it was past 7 p.m. Her hair appointment was long gone, and the dry cleaners would be closed. She found a note from Linda on her kitchen table. Picked up your dress, it's hanging in your closet, left some lasagna in the fridge. Call me if you need anything else. Susan heated up the lasagna and ate mechanically, too tired to taste the food. Tomorrow was the big day, Eric's college graduation. She had promised to be there, fresh and presentable, ready to celebrate his achievement. Instead, she had spent the past 2 days saving lives in an ongoing emergency. She set out her dress, a simple blue one she had bought especially for the occasion, and the shiny black shoes still in their box. The graduation gift for Eric, wrapped in silver paper, sat on her dresser. Everything was ready except Susan herself. Her hands trembled with fatigue, and dark circles shadowed her eyes. Just need a good night's sleep, she murmured to herself as she set her alarm for 10 a.m. The ceremony wasn't until 3 p.m. She would have plenty of time to rest and make herself presentable. As Susan drifted off to sleep, her last thought was of Eric walking across the stage in his cap and gown, accepting his diploma. She had worked so hard to make this moment possible. Nothing would keep her from being there to see it. Susan's alarm buzzed loudly at 10 a.m. on Saturday morning. She reached out to silence it, her body heavy with exhaustion despite the night's sleep. For a moment she lay still, gathering her strength. Today was the day, Eric's graduation. The thought energized her, and she pushed herself up from the bed. In the bathroom mirror, Susan examined her reflection with dismay. Her face looked pale and drawn, with dark circles under her eyes. Her hands still showed faint traces of hospital soap and antiseptic. She would need a long shower and plenty of makeup to look presentable. The hot water helped ease the ache in her muscles. Susan washed her hair twice, trying to remove the lingering smell of the hospital. She had just wrapped herself in a towel when her phone rang. The hospital number flashed on the screen. Susan hesitated, then answered. "Hello? Susan, it's Dr. Peters." The emergency room doctor's voice sounded strained. "I know you're off today, and I wouldn't call if it wasn't important." Susan's heart sank. "What's wrong?" "Joey Mitchell has developed complications. His blood pressure is dropping and he's running a high fever. His parents are asking for you." Susan closed her eyes. "I can't come in today. My son is graduating from college this afternoon." There was a pause on the other end. "I understand. I'll tell them you send your best wishes." "How bad is he?" Susan couldn't help asking. Dr. Peters sighed. "It's touch and go. We're doing everything we can." After hanging up, Susan stood motionless, water dripping from her hair onto the bathroom floor. Joey was just a boy, not much younger than Eric. His parents were counting on her. But she had promised Eric she would be at his graduation. She had already missed so many important moments in his life because of work emergencies. She dialed the hospital back. "Dr. Peters, I'll come in for 1 hour, just to check on Joey and speak to his parents. But I have to leave by 1 p.m. at the latest to make it to the graduation." Susan dressed quickly in jeans and a t-shirt, planning to change into her dress later. She grabbed a granola bar from the kitchen and headed to her car. The drive to Memorial Hospital was all too familiar. In the ICU, Susan found Joey surrounded by machines, his young face flushed with fever. His parents looked up hopefully when she entered. "You came," Joey's mother said, her eyes red from crying. Susan checked Joey's monitors and examined his chart. His infection markers were alarmingly high, and his blood pressure was dangerously low. She spoke quietly with the nurse on duty and then with Dr. Peters when he arrived. "Sepsis," Dr. Peters confirmed. "We've started him on broad-spectrum antibiotics, but he's not responding as well as we'd hoped." Susan spent the next hour helping to stabilize Joey, adjusting his medications, and explaining the situation to his frightened parents. She promised to check in by phone later and prepared to leave. As she was gathering her things, Joey's condition suddenly deteriorated. Alarms blared from his monitors, and the room filled with medical staff. Susan automatically jumped into action, helping to intubate the teenager as his breathing failed. Time slipped away as the medical team fought to save Joey's life. It was only when they finally had him stabilized again that Susan glanced at the clock on the wall. It was 1:45 p.m. The graduation ceremony started at 3:00 p.m., and the university was a 45-minute drive away. "I have to go," she told Dr. Peters urgently. "My son's graduation." "Go," he said, understanding in his eyes. "We've got this covered." Susan rushed to her car, heart pounding with anxiety. She would have to change at the university. There was no time to go home first. She had packed her dress and shoes in the car that morning just in case, along with Eric's gift. Traffic was heavy due to road closures from the storm damage. Susan took alternate routes, but each detour cost precious minutes. Her phone rang. It was Eric. "Mom, where are you?" he asked, a note of worry in his voice. "The graduates need to line up in 30 minutes. "I'm on my way," Susan assured him. "There was an emergency with one of my patients, but I'm coming right now. Save me a seat, okay?" "I already did." Front, row center section. "Don't be late, Mom." The clock on her dashboard read 2:25 p.m. when Susan finally pulled into the university parking lot. She grabbed her things and rushed to the nearest bathroom to change. Her hands trembled as she pulled on her blue dress and slipped into her shoes. There was no time for makeup or fixing her hair properly. She ran a brush through it and secured it with a clip. Eric's gift was tucked safely in her purse as Susan hurried toward the large auditorium where the ceremony would take place. Students in caps and gowns streamed into a side entrance while families and guests filed through the main doors. The large clock above the entrance showed 2:50 p.m., Susan breathed a sigh of relief. She had made it, just in time. She joined the line of people entering the auditorium, her hospital ID badge still clipped to her purse out of habit. As she approached the entrance, a security guard held up his hand. "Ma'am, I need to see your ticket." Susan froze. In the rush and chaos of the past days, she had forgotten the ticket. It was still on her refrigerator at home, held by a magnet. "I don't have it with me," she admitted. "But my son, Eric Miller, is graduating today. He reserved a seat for me in the front row." The guard shook his head. "I'm sorry, but we can't let anyone in without a ticket. It's for security purposes." "Please," Susan pleaded. "I'm a nurse at Memorial Hospital. I've been working for the past 48 hours during the emergency. My son is all I have. I can't miss his graduation." A second guard stepped forward. "Is there a problem here?" "This lady doesn't have a ticket," the first guard explained. "I understand the ticket policy," Susan said, trying to stay calm. "But this is a special circumstance. Can't you make an exception? Or call someone to verify that my son is a graduate?" The second guard's expression remained unmoved. "The rules apply to everyone, ma'am. We have strict orders not to allow anyone without a ticket." Tears of frustration welled in Susan's eyes. After everything she had been through, the endless hours saving lives, the physical exhaustion, the emotional strain, to be stopped at the door seemed unbearably cruel. "My son expects me to be there," she said, her voice breaking. "I promised him I would come." "You should have remembered your ticket," the first guard replied. "We can't make exceptions." Through the open doors, Susan could see families taking their seats inside the auditorium. The ceremony would begin in just a few minutes. Eric would look for her in the front row and find her seat empty. "Please," she tried one more time. "I'm his only family. He worked so hard for this day." The guards exchanged glances, their expressions softening slightly but remaining firm. "I'm sorry, ma'am. Rules are rules." Susan stepped aside, letting others with tickets pass by. She considered calling Eric, but knew he would have turned off his phone by now as the graduates prepared to enter. She leaned against a pillar, fighting back tears of disappointment and frustration. The sound of heavy footsteps approached from behind her. Susan turned to see a group of men walking toward the auditorium entrance. They moved with military precision, their posture straight and purposeful. All wore formal naval uniforms with various insignia and ribbons. The man at the front of the group, tall and broad-shouldered with short gray hair, noticed Susan's distress. He slowed his pace as he approached. "Are you all right, ma'am?" he asked, his voice deep and concerned. Susan wiped at her eyes. "My son is graduating today, but they won't let me in without a ticket. I left it at home. I've been working at the hospital for the past 2 days during the emergency." The man studied her face. "Memorial Hospital?" Susan nodded, touching the ID badge still clipped to her purse. "I'm a trauma nurse there." The man turned to look at his companions, then back at Susan. "What's your name?" "Susan Miller." "And your son?" "Eric Miller, engineering major." The man nodded thoughtfully. "I'm Commander Greg Phillips, United States Navy SEALs. My men and I are here for a special recognition of one of the graduates who is enlisted in our program." He glanced at the guards who were watching the exchange with interest. "Wait here a moment, Ms. Miller." Commander Phillips approached the guards, speaking to them in a low voice. Susan couldn't hear what was said, but she saw the guards' expressions change from resistance to respect. After a brief conversation, Commander Phillips returned to Susan's side. "It seems there's been a misunderstanding," he said, loud enough for the guards to hear. "Ms. Miller is an honored guest today. She'll be joining us." The first guard cleared his throat. "Commander, with all due respect, we have strict orders." Commander Phillips stood straighter, his presence suddenly more commanding. "I understand you have a job to do. So do I, and so does Ms. Miller." He gestured toward Susan. "This woman has spent the last 48 hours saving lives after the bridge collapse and highway accidents. One of those lives might have been someone you know." The second guard hesitated. "Sir, we don't make the rules." "No, but sometimes we need to recognize when exceptions are appropriate," Commander Phillips replied. He turned to Susan. Was your son given any extra tickets he might have left at the check-in desk? Susan shook her head. He only had the one for me. He has no other family. Commander Phillips nodded and turned back to the guards. Gentlemen, my team and I have been invited as honored guests today. We have an extra seat in our reserved section. Ms. Miller will be attending as our guest. The guards exchanged glances, clearly uncertain about challenging a Navy SEAL commander. It's almost 3 hours, Commander Phillips added. The ceremony is about to begin. I would hate to keep the university president waiting while we discuss this further. His tone was polite but firm. Finally, the first guard nodded. All right, Commander. She can go in with your group. Relief washed over Susan's face. Thank you, she whispered. Commander Phillips introduced Susan to the 9 other SEALs standing behind him. They were all in their formal dress uniforms, medals gleaming on their chests. This is Lieutenant Dan Kelly, my second in command, the commander said, indicating a tall man with kind eyes. And these are Chief Petty Officers Mason, Rivera, Bennett, Carter, Johnson, Murphy, Lewis, and Watson. Each man nodded respectfully to Susan. Thank you all so much, she said, still hardly believing her luck. If you hadn't come along. No, need for thanks, Lieutenant Kelly said. We take care of our own, and anyone who spent the last 2 days at Memorial Hospital is definitely one of our own. As they entered the auditorium, Susan explained her situation in more detail. My son Eric has no idea I almost didn't make it. He saved me a seat in the front row center section. Commander Phillips glanced around the nearly full auditorium. Our seats are in the 3rd row, left section. The university is recognizing one of our recruits today. But let's find your seat first. The group made their way down the center aisle. Susan scanned the front row and spotted a single empty seat with a small reserved sign on it. As they approached, she could see Eric's handwriting. Mom. Tears sprang to her eyes. Even after all these years, all the time's work had interfered with family events, Eric had still believed she would come. He had still saved her a place. Commander. Phillips noticed her emotion. Looks like we found it. Susan nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. We'll be right over there if you need anything, the commander said, pointing to their section. Good luck to your son today. Thank you, Susan managed, for everything. As the SEALs moved to their seats, Susan sat down in her reserved spot. She opened her purse and checked that Eric's gift was still safe. The renovated watch that had belonged to his grandfather gleamed in its box. She had planned to give it to him after the ceremony. The auditorium lights dimmed, and a hush fell over the crowd as music began to play. The university president and our faculty members filed onto the stage in their academic robes, followed by the dean of each school. The graduation march started, and the graduates began to enter from the back of the auditorium. Susan craned her neck, searching for Eric among the sea of identical caps and gowns. And then she saw him. Her son, walking tall and proud in his cap and gown, the gold honor cords draped around his shoulders. Susan's heart swelled with love and pride. Every double shift, every missed holiday, every sacrifice had been worth it to see her son reach this moment. As Eric passed her row, his eyes searched the front seats. When he spotted Susan, his face lit up with joy and relief. She smiled back, tears streaming down her face. They had made it. Despite everything, they had both made it to this day. The ceremony began with speeches from the university president and a guest speaker. Susan listened with half an ear, her mind still racing from the events of the past few days. She thought about Joey in the ICU, fighting for his life. She thought about Eric, fighting in his own way to earn his degree, while working part-time to help with expenses. When it came time for the engineering school graduates to receive their diplomas, Susan sat up straighter. The dean began calling names, and students walked across the stage one by one to accept their diplomas. Eric James Miller, summa cum laude, the dean announced. Susan held her breath as Eric walked across the stage. He shook hands with the dean and accepted his diploma. As he moved to the other side of the stage, he paused and looked directly at Susan, touching his heart with his hand in a gesture they had shared since he was a little boy. Susan returned the gesture, her heart so full, it felt like it might burst. After all the graduates had received their diplomas, the Dean of Students stepped to the microphone. Before we conclude our ceremony, we have a special recognition to make. As many of you know, our community was hit hard by severe weather and several accidents in the past few days. Many people worked tirelessly to save lives and help those in need. We would like to take a moment to recognize one of those heroes who is with us today. Susan looked around, wondering who they were talking about. Commander Greg Phillips of the United States Navy SEALs has asked for a moment to speak. The dean continued, gesturing to the commander, who rose from his seat and made his way to the stage. Commander Phillips took the microphone, his posture straight and dignified in his dress uniform. Thank you, Dean Wilson. My team and I are here today to honor one of your graduates who will be joining our training program next month. But there is someone else in this room who deserves recognition. Susan felt a chill run down her spine as the commander's eyes seemed to find her in the crowd. Many of you may have heard about the bridge collapse and highway pileup during the storm, the commander continued. What you may not know is that the medical teams at Memorial Hospital worked around the clock to save dozens of lives. One of those medical professionals is here today. Susan shrank in her seat, uncomfortable with the attention. She had only been doing her job. Ms. Susan Miller, Commander Phillips said, his voice carrying through the auditorium. Would you please stand? Susan froze. Every eye in the auditorium seemed to turn toward her. She glanced at Eric, who looked as surprised as she felt. Slowly, Susan rose to her feet. Ms. Miller is a trauma nurse at Memorial Hospital, the commander explained. For the past 48 hours, she has been saving lives, including the life of my own nephew, who was critically injured in the bridge collapse. A murmur ran through the crowd. Susan had no idea that one of her patients had been related to the commander. Despite working double shifts without rest, Ms. Miller was determined to be here today to see her son, Eric Miller, graduate. Commander Phillips continued. This morning, when another patient took a turn for the worse, she returned to the hospital once more before racing here. Commander Phillips turned to face Susan directly. Ms. Miller, on behalf of my family and the families of all those you helped save, I want to thank you. Your dedication represents the very best of what we hope to instill in our own servicemen and women. The commander raised his hand in a formal salute. Behind him, the 9 other SEALs rose from their seats and did the same. Susan stood motionless, tears streaming down her face. She had never expected this, had never wanted recognition. She had only wanted to be there for her son on his big day. She looked at Eric and saw that he was on his feet, applauding, his face shining with pride. Around him, his fellow graduates began to stand as well. Soon the entire auditorium was on its feet, applauding a surprised and overwhelmed nurse who had only been trying to do her job. Commander Phillips lowered his salute and spoke into the microphone once more. Ladies and gentlemen, this is what real courage looks like. Not just on the battlefield or in dramatic moments, but in the daily choice to serve others even at great personal cost. This is the kind of courage we seek to honor today. As the applause continued, Susan caught Eric's eye across the distance. He mouthed the words, "I love you," and touched his heart again. In that moment, all the exhaustion, all the worry, all the heartache of the past few days melted away. Susan had made it to her son's graduation, and somehow, unexpectedly, her work, her daily, ordinary work of saving lives, had been recognized and honored in front of everyone. The applause finally died down, and Susan sank back into her seat, her cheeks flushed with emotion. The dean returned to the microphone to continue with the ceremony, but Susan barely heard his words. She was thinking about how strange life could be, how you could go from being stopped at the door to being honored, on stage in the span of a few minutes. The graduation ceremony concluded with the traditional turning of the tassels and tossing of caps. As the graduates and their families began to file out of the auditorium, Susan remained in her seat, still processing everything that had happened. She watched as Eric made his way through the crowd toward her, his face glowing with happiness. "Mom," Eric called as he reached her. He pulled her into a tight hug, nearly lifting her off her feet. You made it. Of course I made it, Susan replied, hugging him back just as tightly. I promised, didn't I? Eric stepped back to look at her. You look exhausted. Was it as bad at the hospital as they're saying on the news? Susan nodded. It was pretty rough, but everyone pulled together, and we saved a lot of lives. Including Commander Phillips's nephew, Eric said, his eyes wide with amazement. Mom, why didn't you tell me? I had no idea he was related to anyone in the military, Susan admitted. He was just another patient who needed help. Eric shook his head, smiling. That's so you, saving lives and not even realizing one of them has a famous uncle. He took her hand. Come on, there's someone who wants to meet you. Eric led Susan through the crowded auditorium to where Commander Phillips and his team were speaking with the university president and several faculty members. Commander Phillips, Eric said as they approached. This is my mom. The commander turned and smiled. We've met, though rather briefly. He extended his hand to Susan. It's an honor to meet you properly, Ms. Miller. Susan shook his hand. Thank you for what you did today, getting me into the ceremony and then that speech. She shook her head. It was unnecessary, but very kind. It was entirely necessary. Commander Phillips corrected her gently. My nephew Sam is alive because of you and your team. His parents couldn't be here today, they're still at the hospital with him. But they asked me to give you this. He handed Susan a small envelope. Inside was a simple card with the words, Thank you on the front. Susan opened it to find a handwritten note. To the nurse who saved our son's life, there are no words to express our gratitude. Sam is our only child, our world. Because of you, we still have him. We will never forget what you've done for our family. With eternal thanks, Bill and Mary Phillips. Susan blinked back tears as she read the note. She remembered the young man, Sam, who had been brought in with severe injuries from the bridge collapse. She had worked on him during those chaotic first hours, helping to stabilize him before surgery. How is he doing? She asked. Better, Commander Phillips replied. The doctors say he'll make a full recovery, though it will take time. When I told my brother that I was coming to this graduation today, he insisted I find a way to thank you in person. I was just doing my job, Susan said. Sometimes doing your job makes all the difference in the world, Lieutenant Kelly commented. We understand that better than most. One of the other SEALs, Chief Petty Officer Rivera, stepped forward. My sister is a nurse at County General. She's been telling us about what you all dealt with this week. It sounds like a war zone. Susan smiled tiredly. It felt like one at times. But everyone pulled together. That's what matters in a crisis, Commander Phillips nodded. Good leadership and people willing to put others before themselves. The university president, who had been listening to the conversation, now approached Susan. Ms. Miller, on behalf of the university, I want to add my thanks to Commander Phillips. We've heard about the extraordinary efforts of Memorial Hospital's staff during this crisis. We're proud to count your son among our graduates and honored to have you here today. Eric squeezed Susan's hand, his face beaming with pride. As they continued talking, Susan noticed a familiar face approaching from across the auditorium. It was Linda, her neighbor, making her way through the crowd. Linda! Susan called, waving. How did you get here? Linda reached them, slightly out of breath. I wasn't going to miss Eric's big day. I got one of the last tickets available for the general public. She hugged Susan. I was in the back row. That was quite a moment when they recognized you. Susan introduced Linda to Eric, Commander Phillips, and the others. As they chatted, more people approached. Parents of Eric's classmates, professors who had taught him, even the 2 security guards who had initially refused to let Susan enter without a ticket. Ma'am, the first guard said awkwardly. We wanted to apologize for earlier. If we had known, no apology necessary, Susan assured him. You were doing your job. The second guard nodded. My cousin was in that pileup on the highway. He said the nurses at Memorial were angels. If I had realized you were one of them. The crowd around Susan continued to grow as word spread about the nurse who had been honored by the Navy SEALs. People wanted to shake her hand, tell her about relatives who had been treated at memorial, or simply thank her for her service. Eric watched with amazement as his mother, his quiet, hard-working mother, who had raised him alone and worked countless double shifts to put him through college, became the center of attention. I didn't know everyone would make such a fuss, Susan whispered to him during a brief lull. Eric smiled. Get used to it, Mom. You're a hero. Susan shook her head. I'm just a nurse. There's no just about it, Commander Phillips said, overhearing her comment. Heroes come in many forms, Ms. Miller. Some wear uniforms like ours and some wear scrubs like yours. As the crowd in the auditorium began to thin, Commander Phillips checked his watch. My team and I need to get going. We have a plane to catch. He turned to Eric. Congratulations on your graduation, son. Your country is proud of young men like you. He then addressed Susan once more. Ms. Miller, it's been an honor. My brother and his wife would love to meet you when Sam is feeling better. Would that be all right? Susan nodded. Of course, please tell them I'm so glad he's doing well. The commander and his team said their goodbyes, each shaking hands with Susan and Eric before filing out in perfect formation. Eric turned to his mother after they had gone. I had planned a small celebration dinner at that Italian place you like. I invited Linda and a few friends. Do you feel up to it? Or are you too tired? Susan considered for a moment. She was exhausted, her body still, aching from the long hours at the hospital. But this was Eric's day and she didn't want to miss a minute of it. I'd love to go, she said. Just let me freshen up a bit first. As they walked toward the exit, Eric carrying his cap and gown over his arm, Susan remembered the gift in her purse. Oh, I almost forgot. She stopped and took out the small wrapped box. This is for you. It was your grandfather's. Eric unwrapped the box and opened it to find the restored watch. He lifted it carefully, turning it over to read the inscription. On the back, to my grandson Eric, time passes but love remains. Mom, Eric said softly, his voice thick with emotion. This is amazing. Susan helped him put it on. Your grandfather would be so proud of you today, Eric, just as I am. Eric hugged her again, holding her close. I know I don't say it enough, but thank you, Mom, for everything, for working so hard, for being there whenever I needed you, for teaching me what really matters in life. Susan felt tears well up in her eyes again. You were always worth every sacrifice, every long shift, every missed holiday. Seeing you today, watching you accept that diploma, it made everything worthwhile. They walked together toward the exit, Susan's arm linked through Eric's. Outside, the sun was shining brightly. The storm clouds of the past few days finally cleared away. People called out congratulations as they passed, some still mentioning the surprise recognition during the ceremony. Susan's phone buzzed in her purse. She pulled it out to find a text message from Frank at the hospital. Joey is awake and asking for you. His fever broke. Doctors say he's turned the corner. Take the rest of the weekend off. Doctor's orders. Susan smiled and showed the message to Eric. Good news about one of my patients. The teenager with the spinal injury? Eric asked, remembering their phone conversation from the day before. Susan nodded. He's going to be okay. As they reached Linda's car in the parking lot, Susan took one last look back at the university building where her son had completed his education. The past few days had been among the most challenging of her career, filled with exhaustion, emergencies, and the fear of missing Eric's big moment. Yet somehow it had all worked out. Better than worked out. In trying to fulfill her promise to her son while also helping those who needed her medical skills, Susan had unwittingly created a moment that neither of them would ever forget. Ready to go celebrate? Eric asked, holding the car door open for her. Susan smiled at her son, her grown, educated, compassionate son who made every sacrifice worthwhile. Absolutely, she said. I wouldn't miss it for the world.